want to be a producer with a hit show on Broadway. I want to be a producer.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Producer's Perspective podcast. Greetings from the Hamptons. That's right. I've taken this podcast on the road. I am at the Bay Street Theater in Sag Harbor, where I just moderated a panel on new musical development featuring my wonderful guest. So I kidnapped him and strapped him to my hotel room chair and forced him to do this podcast. And that guest is none other than playwright, screenwriter, performer Charles Busch. Welcome, Charles.
Well, hello. It's wonderful being kidnapped.
Charles has been entertaining audiences with his very unique plays and performances on and off Broadway for several decades now, including Vampire Lesbians of Sodom, which remains one of the longest plays in off-Broadway history.
Longest running plays.
Longest running.
It wasn't that long. It was only an hour and a half.
You can see what we're in for. We're in for some fun on this podcast. That's right, the longest running plays in off-Broadway history. Psycho Beach Party, Die Mommy Die, The Divine Sister, and of course the Broadway smash hit and Tony-nominated The Tale of the Allergist Wife. He has adapted and starred in some of his own work on the big screen, has lectured and conducted master classes at many colleges and universities across the country, including NYU and Harvard, and received many awards over the years, including a special Drama Desk Award for career achievement as both performer and playwright. Not too many people can claim that. And was given a star on the Playwrights Walk of Fame outside the Lucille Lortel Theater. You can read all about him at his website, charlesbusch.com. So, Charles, let's start with a very simple. How did you fall in love with the theater? Where did it start?
No, I can't remember when I didn't love the theater. But I was so fortunate that I actually grew up in New York City. I'm one of those rare people who actually are from New York City. And I had, like many people, I had an extraordinary aunt. You know, it seems to be a recurring thing with people. An extraordinary aunt, and she started taking me to the theater when I was about 8 years old. But, I joke that she would belong to these sort of like the Macy's Theater Club, where you would order your tickets at the beginning of the season or the season before, so you didn't know what anything was going to be like, and you had to just pick on faith. So we tended not to see any of the hit shows. We would just pick the flop shows. So as a kid, I saw Baker Street and Tavares and The Girl Who Came to Supper, Here's Where I Belong, all these kind of shows that weren't successful. But it was, just magical thing. Yeah, so I just always wanted to kind of be up there on the stage, and I was desperate to be a child star, but nobody would exploit me, so that didn't work out. I had to wait a long time, and then I went to Northwestern University. I was a theater major, but I was absolutely just fixed on this is what I was going to do, and nothing was going to stop me.
And you were fixed on being a performer at the time.
I always wrote. I was writing plays when I was a small child, always writing, but I somehow didn't really think of that as the career. It was just to be on the stage, and ultimately I began writing really just to provide myself with opportunities to act.
So that's where it started. You wrote stuff to give yourself a shot.
Well, I knew, maybe because I'm from New York City, or maybe just nature gave me a pragmatic attitude about life. So when I was at Northwestern and I was never cast in any play, it made me think I might have a hard time in professional theater, that maybe I'm a rather eccentric type, shall we say. It may not work out, and it was rather devastating revelation to think, this thing that I want to do so badly, maybe there's not a real place for me, so what do I do? But fortunately, once again, being from New York City, when I would come home for vacation, I started seeing more experimental theater. And this was, let's say, in the early mid-'70s, and it was kind of a golden age of experimental theater with these extraordinary figures like Charles Ludlam and Richard Foreman and then the Performance Group, and particularly Charles Ludlam. When I saw him with his company, the Ridiculous Theatrical Company, and it was almost as if I was hit by a tidal wave of just seeing the possibilities of what life could have in store for me, creating my own work and maybe having my own company, or the theater could be whatever I chose it to be. It didn't have to be the Broadway fare that I had been raised on, where maybe there was no place for me.
You know, of course, you're considered this great artist, but at the same time, I see in what you did at Northwestern is this really entrepreneurial attitude.
I always had that. Yeah, I always had that of that somehow I would do it myself. I'd get the play on, do it. Yeah, no, it's funny about that. Because in some ways, I'm kind of a bit of a kook, and that the mechanics of living sort of are a little bit beyond me. I have trouble screwing in a light bulb. And I really, it's a problem being me. Life is very difficult for those of us who have not mastered the mechanics of living, and everything is a challenge. Just really, plugging in a lamp. It's just, nothing works for me.
I will testify to that only because when Charles and I were arranging this podcast, I said, well, I will text you my information. Charles, what's your phone number? And he said to me, how would I find that out?
Yeah, no, life is very difficult for me. I no sense of direction. I walk a mile out of my way every day. On the other hand, I particularly as a young person starting out, I booked myself around the country doing my act originally because I was a solo performer for the first 7 years of my career, and with no management at all, and just booked myself around the country at small nonprofit theaters. I mean, I was very driven, and I made it work. Just had to do it.
And what was that first act like? What did you do?
Well, it was, how do I describe it? I was a solo performer. I would be wearing just, kind of neutral, shirt and pants. And they were almost like screenplays where I would play all the characters and tell these very complicated narratives. And I'd play men, women, anything that the narrative required. And I was very influenced by a number of people. First, there was a legendary, I guess what you call her, monologist, Ruth Draper, who was a legendary figure in the theater. She died, almost when I was born, so I never saw her. But she was recorded late in her career, and her recordings of her monologues are just fascinating. I learned so much, and she was a big influence on Lily Tomlin and a lot of people. So her records, and then other contemporary performers that I saw who could play multiple characters in a way that created an illusion that you were seeing an ensemble play. And I would do sometimes the dialogue back and forth between several characters, and the idea was to create that kind of illusion that you're seeing a whole play. So I did that, and I kept learning, and I did that for 7 or 8 years. And I learned so much as a writer, about exposition, characterization, and certainly as a performer, performing for every kind of audience. It really was almost like when you hear about people who did vaudeville, and I was frustrated because I wanted to be an overnight success naturally, but in a way things worked out just fine because I would not have been ready had my moment come sooner. I was not ready, but I gradually just, I was convinced. It's a slightly, you're slightly deranged, and you have that kind of faith in yourself. But I was convinced that if I just kept at it with like a horse with blinders on, and if I kept learning and getting better, that it had to work. That it had to, eventually I'll earn a living doing this, and it's going to work out for me. It's kind of nutty. It just didn't occur to me that it wouldn't. I mean, frustrating and angry. When's it going to be my turn? And the gatekeepers in my way, and all that. But never to the point that maybe I won't do this. Maybe it's not going to work. I remember I was raised by my aunt, and she was very, very supportive. But I do remember one point her saying to me, "Well, you need something to fall back on." I was like, "What?" She said, well, you draw very well. You could be an artist. I said, artist? You want to be a painter to fall back on? And she said, well, Tony Bennett, he's a big star. She says, well, Johnny Carson sells his clothesline. I said, it's hard enough trying to be an actor. I should also have a line of menswear. Nobody understands.
And was there a moment when you, after this deranged period, where you're like, oh wait, it's working now? When was that moment?
Well, the thing was, it was a very difficult period for me. My 20s were not fun because it got to the point as years were going by that I was doing this, that I was getting better, and I'd get rave reviews in reputable publications like the Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle, different cities I was in, and I would sell out. I'd play these different nonprofit theaters or small nonprofit theaters, various places, and I'd be there for a month at a time. And I would, it wasn't just like a one-night gig. I'd be there for like a month, and I'd sell out the theater, and I was a hit, and give rave reviews. But I still couldn't earn a living in theater because I didn't have any management, so I didn't work enough. So I'd close in San Francisco, great star, and then come home and have to do office temp work. Or I draw very well, so I would be a quick sketch portrait artist, did a lot of crazy different things, but then I'd have my next gig in another city and do well. So that went on for about 7 years, getting better and better, but frustrating that. Just because the whole thing is to earn a living. That's, you're not really a professional somehow unless you're earning a living. So that was the dream, not to win an Oscar or anything, but just to earn a living in your chosen profession is one of the most difficult accomplishments, I think, known to mankind.
And when did that happen for you? When did that moment come?
It was very dramatic. Well, I've been just doing this act, and I really was at kind of low ebb. And actually, it's kind of a mystical story because I was working as a quick sketch portrait artist for an agency called Rent-A-Witch that booked tarot card readers in Palmas. And I remember I was in this car with the head witch, Barbara, and I was telling her that really my career, that I was a performer, not a portrait artist. And I was so frustrated because it just wasn't working. I wasn't getting the big break. And she said, all right, this is what you're going to do. She says, I'm giving you a recipe of an herbal bath. And you take these herbs and you put them in the bathtub and you sit in that tub for a half hour for 6 days. Went for a half hour each day for 6 days, and you will find that your luck is going to change. So I said, I'll do it. So I did it, and I sat in that awful bathtub, oregano and garlic, and a bay leaf stuck up my ass, and and I thought after a week, I thought, well, this is just ridiculous, and I forgot about it. And then, a couple years later, I started doing this timetable, and my luck changed within that year. I wish I still had that recipe.
I was going to say, we could market that together. The Charles Busch recipe for success. The bath.
I lost it. Because I thought it was ridiculous, but maybe it wasn't. So anyway, so the big twist was that this is 1984, and I knew this friend, this very exotic lady who was a performance artist, and she invited me to see her act way down on the Lower East Side in Alphabet City, which is a part of New York where it's just Avenue A, Avenue B, Avenue C. And in 1984, it was a very scary neighborhood. It was a lot of crack being done, and the buildings were mostly burned out and rubble. But occasionally, there were little pockets of an interesting dance club or art gallery. And Madonna and Keith Haring came out of that environment. So I was kind of scared, but I went down to this creepy place, and it was a storefront art gallery performance space bar called the Limbo Lounge. And I was just dazzled. It was this kind of punk, gay, goth audience, and they didn't just hang pictures. It was an art installation. It was all very grotesque, and like out of Cocteau or Berlin in the 20s. I mean, it really was very decadent. And my friend's act was You kind of had to be there. I mean, it was very strange indeed. But I was so enraptured that I immediately found this young man who owned the place. And I said, I would just love to do a show here. And he looked on the calendar, and he didn't know who I was, and nobody knew who I was anyway. So he just gave me, a weekend a month later. So I just quickly I was doing some office temp work, and between phone calls, I just wrote this little sketch. I thought, well, I'll be in drag. I'll just think very decadent. I didn't want to do my regular severe, performance art. I'll be in drag. I'll do something really outrageous, and I'll be the kind of vampire actress, and it was about a half hour long, this whole skit, really. And I just asked some friends of mine who were basically told they were unemployable in the theater. So we rehearsed it a couple times and literally spent no money because there was no stage. So you couldn't have a set. And we kind of threw the costumes together with stuff in the closet. And we just had a ball for that weekend. We decided to do second weekend, third weekend, did another little play there. And then this young man, Michael, who ran the place, said we should be like a regular theater group there. So we just kept doing these plays every 3 weeks. And then particularly this one play, this Vampire Lesbians of Sodom, I don't know, just people kept coming, packing the joint. We get squeezing 250 people in this tiny space. And we were in the right place at the right time, because it was like that 6-month period just sort of happened that all the media was talking about this crazy performance art scene in the East Village. So People Magazine and New York Magazine would do big stories about it. And our plays had these crazy titles like Vampire Lesbians of Sodom and Theodora, She-Bitch of Byzantium, and so it was good for a punchline in the article. So we got this great publicity, and, we didn't spend a penny on publicity, but so they were lined up down the block, and finally, Ken Elliott, who was my roommate in directing the show and producing it as such and acting it, said, maybe this is our big break, this crazy thing that we're doing strictly for our own amusement. And we tried to get some producers to move it to a real place, and nobody would touch it. And then Ken figured out that if we raised $55,000, we could at least open, at an off-Broadway theater. So we got the Provincetown Playhouse on McDougal Street, and we got the money together. It took us about 6 months. It was a lot of money for us.
Yeah, what year was that?
84. I mean, it was ridiculously low even for 84, but still that's
a lot of money.
For people who had no money at all. I mean, but everybody's mother and, grandmother gave $5,000. We had to raise $55,000. We had about 250 investors, and there was like down to $5 a unit. And, so we opened, and we really had just enough to open. That was kind of it. Then, sure enough, the opening night came, and we got a rave review in the New York Times, just rave review, and everybody, it was very touching because everyone got mentioned in the review, and all these people who've been so discouraged. It was just the greatest moment, maybe the greatest moment of my life. And nothing, even, I had a big Broadway opening and, all that, but I don't think anything can be as exciting as when the moment when your life really is going to change. Because my life didn't change that much from, I had a nice career already before Allergist Wife, but to go from office temp to professional was the big leap. And that show ran 5 years, and I was in it for about 2. Then we replaced everybody and got new actors, and we went on and did other shows. And so anyway, that was a long answer to a simple question you asked me. But it's those of us who were involved, we consider it kind of Brigadoon mixed with 42nd Street and the greatest story ever told.
And you obviously have been known for a lot of your drag performances, but Was that the first time? Was that the first one?
Yeah,
Where did that start?
I could say it was, but maybe I could say it wasn't. Thing was that when I had seen Ludlam, when I was really in my late teens, or when I first saw him, and he used drag and as a theatrical element, and I have an androgynous nature, and I was always kind of doing kind of celebrity impressions, and even more than that for my friends, but even more, I was always kind of improvising my own kind of movie dialogue without thinking that maybe that's kind of what I should really be doing. so when I was living in Chicago, after I graduated from Northwestern, I stayed in Chicago about 2 more years because I wasn't. It's hard when you're from New York City to sort of start your career in a way because everybody else kind of comes to New York to start a career, but when you're there already, it's kind of you kind of need somewhere to come from. That sounds kind of nutty, but so I stayed in Chicago, and while I was there, I met a group of people who I was in a play, and I met some people, and I said that I had this fantasy of starting a company, kind of like Ludlam, and writing plays and being the lead, and they all kind of wanted to hook on, and so I started doing these kind of drag plays in Chicago and doing them in bars and in movie theaters up to the Late Show and stuff, but it was the wrong group. There were people who ultimately didn't really share the same, hopes and dreams with me, and kind of resented me actually, and because I was getting all the attention, and it was a rather awful experience. And so funny how it was something that was so, and I was so burnt from it that's why I became a solo performer in a way, because I didn't want to have to depend on anyone anymore. And then yet, ironically, 10 years later, this greatest thing happened to me with the same type of group, only this was a group of people who believed in me and felt I had something to offer, and were grateful for the roles that I wrote for them. And, so it was totally like mirror images of each other, one disastrous and one fantastic.
Do you enjoy writing more now or performing more? You started as a performer and then the writing came. What do you have a preference?
It sort of depends, on my mood, really. Some days I think, when I'm so in the throes of writing something, and I am happiest. I'm happiest when I'm really right in the middle of rewriting something and just going into that document on the computer 5 times a day, just with a new idea, and just reading it again, and changing a line, changing a word, changing it back, changing it again. I guess I am happiest then, but I've derived enormous joy from just being in a play, and there's something as an actor writer, there aren't too many of us.
Actually, there are a lot of you, just not a successful group,
but there's
which is really a testament to you.
Something just wonderful about creating this fictional world where for 2 hours the world is exactly as I planned, and everybody's saying exactly the lines that I want them to say, and moving in the same place, and I'm in the center of it all. It's fantastic. It's and I don't know. I don't know where my future lies, what I want to do at this point. I have many notions and ideas. Maybe plays, maybe not. I don't know. But when you ask me that question, I have just derived enormous satisfaction and joy at writing, and particularly writing and acting in my own plays.
How do you edit yourself when you're writing and speaking your own words? Is it difficult for you? Do you get in fights with yourself?
No. Fortunately, I've always worked with a director. Others in my position, like Charles Lavin, were also directors, and I've never done that. I don't know. I never desired to direct a play. I've directed some films. I directed a feature film and a short subject, and I love that. But I think it's harder to direct a play than it is a movie. And I don't know if I really have a talent for it. I'm a good acting coach, but I don't know if I'd be good at staging necessarily, or even want to. So I always worked with a director, and I've worked with directors from the very beginning of a project. I work with them really as dramaturg. So I've always kind of resented the role of dramaturg when we've gone to nonprofit theaters, because I've been working so closely for 2 years with this director that, don't want anybody else muscling in. And yet I know that, numerous very successful writers have had extraordinary experiences with dramaturgs who've developed them, and I've never had that. But I've had these profound relationships with with my directors, and I've worked with very few people. You know, I've in a career that's almost 40 years old, I've probably worked with, maybe I can't count them on one hand, the directors I've actually worked with. Maybe hand and a half. You know, I do many plays with the same person, with Carl Andrus now, the past 15 years, almost without exception. You know, and they work as dramaturgs, so I don't really need they're the outside eye, and they don't seem to be afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. Nobody seems to be terribly intimidated by me at all, but I listen. I find when I get notes, I sort of fall silent, but it's not out of disapproval. I just kind of absorb it. I just kind of sit, I listen, and then I go home and I might stew for a while, like, oh, that's ridiculous notion. No. Think some more about it. Well, I'll just take a look I'll open up the file again. It's ridiculous. And, well, you know, I suppose I could do that. Well, that's a funny line. That's not exactly what he asked for, but that's good. Yeah, well, this is good. You know, that was a smart idea he had. You know, that's kind of the process. So, you know, it's, I don't think I've ever, I think I've had things where I felt it was more destructive with the actual outside dramaturg who has gotten me confused and had talked a good game and then got me confused till I didn't really know what the play was about. And then turned out the play wasn't very good.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the director as dramaturg rather than yet another voice.
Yeah. Now, some directors are. There may be some directors who that's not their skill. You know, that their great imagination is in stage pictures and that sort of thing. But I've had great experiences with the director as dramaturg.
Tell me a little bit about Allergist Wife and how that began and started for you.
Well, in a way, I'm meeting you today because we're at this reading of my play, The Green Heart, this musical that I did in the mid-'90s. And Allergist Wife is in a sense directly connected to that. Because we did The Green Heart at Manhattan Theater Club. And while we were doing that, I became acquainted with Lynn Meadow, the artistic director there. And we just kind of hit it off immediately. And she wasn't involved in the production. She was the artistic director of the theater. But, we just, hit it off big. And then the opening night of Green Heart and the reviews were disappointing. And Lynn said to me, I'd like MTC to be your artistic home and I'll produce your next play, whatever it is. I thought, whoa, I thought, wow, that's some, leap of faith. And I thought, well, I better, take her up on this. I thought, well, and Manhattan Theater Club isn't really the place for Vampire Lesbians Part 2. So I thought, what would be, something to do there? And I had this character that I had done in a solo show called I did a solo show called Flipping My Wig at the WPA Theater. And it was a different kind of collection of pieces that I did. And one of them was about this sort of Upper West Side Jewish, frustrated, raging lady, Marian Passman. And it was kind of the first time that I had really delved into my own kind of background in New York. And it was 6 minutes long, but it was this very specific thing. And it was really good. And for a long time, I'd thought, gee, I'd like to write a play around that kind of lady and something really well observed from what I knew. And then when Lynn made that offer to me, I thought, oh, this is a good opportunity to, because it's kind of about the MTC subscribers. They are Marian Passman, all these sort of people, these kind of culturally obsessed, women. And I played kind of came to me, and I wrote it fairly quickly. I knew those people. I knew that milieu. And then I saw Linda Lavin in a play called Death-Defying Acts. And I obviously knew Linda Lavin, but in that play, she was kind of playing a character kind of like that. And so as I wrote the play, I had her in mind as I continued working on it. Finished the play and gave it to Lynn Meadow, and she loved it. And she said, let's do a reading right away. And who's your fantasy? Marjorie was the character in the play. I said, well, Linda Lavin. So let's get her. And we got her to do the reading. And it was extraordinary thing. Knowing Linda now, I'm sure she was reading it cold. I'm sure she didn't prepare for that reading. But it was a perfect match of actress and role. And I've never seen the like of it again. This reading, because the actors are just kind of sitting at a table, and then there's an audience of the interns and various drones and et cetera. And Linda it was everything that she ended up doing in the show for real was at this reading. And at one point, there's a big dramatic scene fight with the mother, the elderly mother. And then Linda just got up from the table. Where's she going? And she went to the window, was standing there, and she was just acting it. It was so thrilling. After it was over, Lynn and I were like hungry, like dogs, our tongues hanging out. Just, so you'll do the play, I don't know. I'm not sure. And for 9 months, she kept us dangling. And I was determined that she was going to do that play. And I stalked her. I was relentless. I went to L.A. where she was doing collected stories, showed up there. I wrote her letters comparing her to Bernhardt and Duza. I was just shameless, and she buckled and decided to do it.
Well, it worked before this deranged period of your life, this intense passion.
If you really want something, you just have to go for it. And I've had long periods where I've sometimes felt I lost that intensity. But when I really want something, I go for it.
Wikipedia's entry about that play
What did it say?
Says, in his first play written for a mainstream audience.
Oh, that word.
I know.
I hate that word.
I had a feeling you would.
Well, don't you now? Now tell me if you agree with this. I think the only difference between mainstream and downtown, or whatever you want to call it, is the size of your publicity budget. You could do the same. You could, go on a Broadway stage and, take off all your clothes and, humiliate yourself. And if you have ads on taxi cabs and on, everywhere, you're mainstream.
Yeah.
If you do it, in a garage somewhere you're downtown.
It's what we were talking about before when you were saying the frustrating years of your life because of the gatekeepers, etc. Once someone opens a Broadway theater to you and lets you do your whatever show you're doing, you're mainstream. You've got that budget. You're getting people in there.
Doesn't matter what the content is.
Yeah. How long you run, that's, of course, another
maybe something
thing.
different, but... Yeah, I really do think there's... So, yes, so I've told the story before, but I'll tell it on your podcast. First of all, when you do something noteworthy, the press and, you have your narrative that season about you, and you have to kind of go with it, and you have to have some kind of, understanding of the way showbiz works, or that your story has to be compressed in 30 words or less. So that season, it was the story was that this downtown drag queen had so shockingly wrote this mainstream Neil Simon kind of comedy. That was my story that season. However, only 5 years before, I had written a play called You Should Be So Lucky, which was a Jewish comedy, and that had a rave review in the Times and by Brantley, and had a nice run off Broadway. But we forgot that part because it didn't go with the narrative. So and I'm with you. I want to sell tickets. I'll buy it. But it did sort of bug me when when that mainstream phrase was bandied about so much, because I kind of felt there was a little bit of a put down of everything I'd done for the last 25 years. You know, that isn't it wonderful that finally he's mainstream. You know, and I was very proud of the work I'd done for 20 years or more, with wonderful collaborations that I was very proud of, and things that, and in truth, since I'd performed at the Limbo Lounge, you know, in Avenue C, every play of mine had started at, you know, reputable nonprofit, you know, the WPA Theater or whatever, and had each play had transferred commercially off Broadway. Certainly it doesn't happen anymore. So my joke was that my audience wasn't all pinheads and carny folk. You know, I just was, you know, I think I was kind of mainstream, but just not on Broadway. But the night that everything changed was one night I was home watching Survivor, I think, and
Charles Busch, a Survivor fan.
I've never missed a single episode of Survivor in 20 seasons.
20.
I've never missed a single episode.
And you can't operate a DVR, right? So you watch them live.
No, that I can do. With trouble, no, that I can do. My sister can't, because she's worse than I am. But anyway, I was watching Survivor, and I looked at the clock, and it was like 8:35. I thought, oh, Linda must be going toward the end of Act 1. And I just made a lot of money. And something like that. Oh, I love being mainstream.
That's a great story. Someone actually told me once, Ken, you'll know you've made it when you get a check without having to show up for half hour.
Yes. Oh, I couldn't believe it. I tell you, everybody in the world, I wish everybody in the world could have a hit Broadway play. It is the most wonderful thing in the world. And I've been desperate to try to get another one. It hasn't happened. Not for lack of trying either. Because it's hard.
Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now? What are you...
Well, you know, honestly, for the past year, I've been having a wonderful time just exploring every other kind of avenue of creativity other than writing a play. I've been having a wonderful time. I've been painting and selling my artwork, which is awfully nice. And then... You fell back on being an artist. I felt that my aunt, if she had lived, would have been so happy that I'm actually selling my artwork now. And, like Tony Bennett. And then I've been doing my cabaret act. And for the past 3 years. And traveling all over. This past year I was in Paris and London and San Francisco, Palm Springs, Boston, Miami, Atlanta, New Orleans. I'm having a wild old time. And my pianist, Tom Judson, is, you know, my dear, dear friend. And we just have fun traveling around, you know, getting new material together, learning songs. And, you know, I'm not the world's greatest singer, but I approach the songs I choose as a storyteller and as acting pieces. And it seems to work very well. And so I'm loving it. And I never toured as an actor. I always wanted to tour our shows, but economically it really wasn't. It seemed like they were best in smaller theaters, and it just was too expensive to do. So this has been a way of. I mean, I don't want to come off to Norma Desmond here, but I'm going to all these places, and when I do my act, as soon as it's over, I just sort of stay there and take pictures with everybody, kind of like Santa at Macy's. But I meet everybody in the audience, and it's been very gratifying and even rather emotional for me to meet people all over the country who appreciate me and who I've meant something to through either the couple little cult movies I've made or seeing my plays done in local productions or reading them or I wrote this one novel that seems to have gotten around somehow and so that's a wonderful thing after almost 4 decades to find out that there are people all over who you meant something to.
You started out touring in a way. Something
I'm
tells
back
me
exactly where I came.
But you have management now, I assume.
Kind of. Yeah. I mean, my manager. I have this wonderful manager, Jeff Melnick, who I've been with for about 30 years, and he's really a screenwriter, screen and TV writer, manager. But I did a lot of that stuff with him at a certain point. But he just loves the theater, and so he doesn't make much money from me, but he just loves. I'm his conduit to the theater, and lately I've turned him into a cabaret booking agent at the age of 70 years old. He's suddenly Broadway Danny Rose, and he's kind of, he's a man of great enthusiasm. So he's suddenly, because he's kind of half retired actually. He really has two clients. One who makes him a lot of money in TV, and then me. And so I think he's getting a real kick out of suddenly at 70, calling up the cabarets and trying to up my fee,
I love it. All right. Well, my last question for you, which I ask all my guests, it's become known as the Genie Question, which is, I want you to imagine that the genie from Aladdin comes into the fabulous Sag Harbor Inn here where we are, and says to you, Charles, I've admired your career so much. You've worn so many hats. You've been so determined. I'm going to grant you one wish. You can change whatever you want about Broadway or the theater. Anything, whatever bugs you more than anything, keeps you up at night, drives you crazy. I'll change one thing for you with the snap of a finger. What would that one thing that you would change be?
Well, if we're talking Fantasyland, I wish that, it was economically feasible that all tickets to Broadway shows were no more expensive than $25, and that everybody could make a big fortune from it, but the public could see it for $25. I would change everything.
And it certainly would. Charles, I want to thank you so much it's midnight now where we are, so thank you for doing this after a very long day. And I know all my listeners so admire your passion, your determination to get you where you are. I know a lot of my listeners also wear a lot of hats, and you are the perfect example of a person and an artist that can perform, write, and do just about everything because of your determination to do so. So thank you for that, and thank all of you for listening, and we will see you next time.